Howdy, Hotheads. It's John, in the Edit Bay. This week, we respond to some viewer mail sent in by friend of show, Tim. Thanks, Tim. He was interested in getting our take on a specific topic that he heard on another podcast. Now, as I've mentioned several times on our show, I haven't really listened to other podcasts since we've started this show, due to a fear of accidentally stealing somebody else's content and not giving them the proper credit. If I don't listen to other shows and I don't hear their topics, then I can feign ignorance when we inevitably plagiarize someone else's work. Thanks for making my fear become a reality as we take a roughly 30-minute dive into another icy, cold, echo-based nights.
Hey, John. We got mail.
Who?
We got mail.
No, that would mean that someone listens to us.
I know, right?
That doesn't make any sense.
It's super weird. It's addressed to the right person, too. It's addressed to Hoth Topics Pod. I checked, and I made sure there weren't any others.
It's impressive.
Want to know what it says?
I guess.
So, we got this email from a friend of show, Tim. You might be familiar with him.
He's probably a friend of your show too, because he's friends with all podcasts.
Gotcha.
He's like Gamera.
You were addressing the audience, not me.
Yeah, specifically not you.
That super confused me because you looked at me and said he's probably a friend of your show too, and I said I'm thinking we have the same show. What are we talking about?
We're talking about Tim, friend of all podcasts.
Right,
like
Tim.
Gamera, but for podcasts.
Tim, friend of all podcasts, sent us an email. And he said, "Hello, Hot Topics Pod.
That's us.
This week I heard a question from a listener on the Force Center podcast, which was really interesting, which I thought it might be cool to get your perspective on, since one of you is a fan of the Jedi and one a fan of the Imperial faction. This is true."
I didn't know you liked the Empire.
Oh, and I didn't know you liked the Jedi.
I don't. I'm the other fan of the Empire.
Wow, you're a problem. Cassian Andor was working along with the rebels, who all would say, quote, "May the Force be with you," and had a reference of sort for the Jedi. We know that Cassian has been in the fight since he was 6 years old and was originally part of the Confederacy of Independent Systems. So what might have that been like for him growing up and possibly thinking of the Jedi as the bad guys? Did the CIS also have Force Faith followers within it? And how would a citizen deal with that conundrum? We see in A New Hope that some of the Imperials felt that the Jedi religion was old and outdated belief system. What was that designed into the Imperial doctrine, or just a feeling held by its members? Keep up the great podcast, and which stands for May the Force be with you. And in parentheses, unless you're Cassian or an Imperial, in which case your atheism is cool too. That's kind of a multi-part question there. Why don't we break it down a little bit? The first question that I kind of see out of this is what would it be like growing up in a faction where the Jedi are the enemy?
Okay, a fair bit of warning. I did no research for this.
Neither did I.
And if you know the answers to these questions because you read them in a novel, please to send us an email, like our friend Tim, at hothpod@gmail.com, and let us know where you found these answers. And also let me know if there's an audiobook version, because I'm lazy. I wrote many a note, which probably rambles and then doesn't end with a answer or an answer to the question specifically, as I probably got distracted as I wrote them, as one tends to do when making stuff up. Alright, the How Did the Galaxy Perceive the Jedi? The I Didn't Do Any Research edition. I know that's not the question, that's just how I titled this so that I could find it on my desktop.
Sure.
So, before the Galactic Civil War, the Jedi were known as peacekeepers of the known galaxy, one might say. When the Clone Wars came along, it's kind of presented to us that they sided with the Republic.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel that there's an argument against that. Can you think of if anyone would know of an argument against
No, they're even if you dip into Legends, like the Jedi being an independent sort of group away from the Republic, it was like thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years before.
At some point, there was a connection made between the government and this militant religious order,
right,
to basically become the peacekeepers of the Republic.
Yeah, and
even though they outwardly, I guess you could say that if the galaxy is unified under the Republic, then they are the defenders of the people in that galaxy as it is one unit.
Right. And we talked about it a little bit way back in one of our Jedi episodes, but essentially it was at a time where Force users were like very big in trying to vie for control of the galaxy, so the Republic was like, well, if we're going to side with some of the crazy powerful wizard people, the Jedi are the ones that more closely resemble our thought process and our belief system. And that's kind of how that happened. That's the short version.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they come into the Republic not as law enforcement, but as like a second branch of, I guess, law enforcement.
Yeah.
So like there's Coruscant police, but they have their duties, and the Jedi have their own duties related to peacekeeping, but not the same as like a local police force or a local defense force sort of thing.
Right. They're kind of just like
they're
not a part of the government. They just have the approval of the government to do whatever they were going to do anyway. I mean, who's going to argue?
They're like the UN peacekeepers, except the ability to go on offensive missions, even though they try not to.
Right.
They try to talk their way out of things. At least Qui-Gon does.
Well, and that's kind of like we're led to believe that that's kind of the default, like what the Jedi have been doing for thousands of years, because there wasn't really like the galaxy isn't in a constant state of war. And so for a number of generations, like, that's what the Jedi were doing, just trying to solve things diplomatically. And they weren't going on militaristic missions. That's kind of the change that brings us to this question.
Yeah. To circle back to the question of how did the other side perceive the Jedi, sort of thing. We know when the Confederate systems declared their independence from the Republic, it was... I'm trying to wrap this thought up in a
wrap it up in a little
thing.
A thought burrito. Yeah,
I'm looking at my notes and I'm taking the senses and trying to extrapolate more things, and then like I've written myself into a corner where that doesn't make sense. So
I'm familiar with this problem.
So like, all right, so the Jedi appeared to side with the Republic to those on the other half of the galaxy that have left the Republic. Now this could just be because. Like we just mentioned, that they were kind of the ordained guardians of the Republic. A thought that crossed my mind when I was writing this was maybe they appeared to more vocally side with the Republic because it was being led by Dooku. And we've seen in the Clone Wars cartoon that the Order doesn't really look on those who have left the Order as maybe we can go back, like reach out to grab them. They erect a bust of them and then just turn their backs on them. And we see that mostly with Ahsoka.
Yeah, they use them as a kind of like a cautionary tale.
Exactly. So now we have one side of the galaxy that are no longer under the protection of the Jedi, or at least they perceive themselves to no longer be under their protection because they've sided with the Republic. And now with the assault on Geonosis, the Senate has put Jedi Masters and Knights in command of the Grand Army of the Republic.
Right.
So what the planets in the Confederacy are seeing are the armies of a government that they don't want to be a part of being led by members of an order that kind of proclaim that they want peace. And I think in the movies and in the Clone Wars we kind of see this where towards the end of the Clone Wars, I think it was Mace Windu and Yoda were talking, and Mace is like, hey, we're kind of doing the opposite of what our order is standing for, and it's kind of taken them, 3 years to realize that, or 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, it kind of becomes like, I could see why it started, and then it just kind of unraveled. Like, they were like, oh, if we involve ourselves now, we can close this conflict and bring it to an end before... and like bring everybody back in, and that's like the peacekeeping process. We're helping to solve the problem, and then as it dragged on and on and on and on, we saw what happened.
And I think this will come back in later. Putting them in charge of the armies was a great manipulation. I don't know if this is true, but a manipulation of Palpatine to further discredit the Jedi Order. As we know, he's playing the long game.
Oh, absolutely.
And this comes back in the end. What I've always found interesting about this situation, if you are a master or a knight, you're just given the rank of general. If you are a Padawan, someone that's still learning how to be a knight, you're given the rank of commander. You're already put in charge of these clones that are, I was going to say men and women, but it's really just men.
Yeah. It's really just one specific man.
Specifically mans. I guess mans is the correct
mans.
Yeah. Not a Mandalorian. Don't be confused.
It's a manzalori.
So yeah, they're putting control of these soldiers that have been trained to basically, they're conditioned to just take the orders of anyone that's a higher rank than them. It's part of their mental conditioning, and the kind of free will that the clones start to exhibit towards the end is still, it's free will within the confines of that conditioning.
Right. So looking at it from that side of things, I think that from the Confederacy side of things, I think that it would be really up to the individuals of the Confederacy to really have that internal struggle with themselves, because they're witnessing the hypocrisy of the Jedi, and it's directed at them. So, but a lot of these people are used to living under a banner where the Jedi still have a lot of respect, and were going around fixing some of the problems that the Republic had, that the Confederacy had a problem with, that made them leave in the first place. So I think we see sometimes in Clone Wars, especially in some of the episodes where Padme is trying to start more diplomatic relations with the Confederacy, and that there's still this sort of you're gonna have people who are going to be yeah, the Jedi are leading these armies, but why are they doing it? Maybe they're doing it because they think it'll come to a swift end. And on the other side, you're gonna have the people going I knew it. These are hypocritical. They're out here killing our droids.
That's something I was actually thinking about the other night. Is I feel like we see that the Republic is labeling these conflicts and the Grand Army and all their victories as liberating these Confederate planets. And for the planets that they are specifically fighting the droid armies on, I can see that as a half-truth. But there were planets where the army of the species, or the residents,
right, the natives,
the Umbarans were fighting the clones. I don't think they were fighting droids on that planet. They were just fighting the Umbarans. Geonosis, the Geonosians were fighting for their planet, even though they did have the droid armies there, because that's where they're being one of the manufacturing plants. Yeah. But we do see a handful of times that this isn't Dooku and his droid army occupying planets to fight the Republic. It's these planets asking Dooku and his army to come and bolster their own defenses. Right. So if it was just them the clones fighting the droids, it's kind of a more black and white situation sort of thing. But now we have Onderon's planetary defense forces involved. We people that are actually passionate about this cause, just as passionate as the Jedi were for trying to bring peace to the galaxy, sort of thing. Right. I don't know if we ever see any non-clone forces on the Republic side that aren't Jedi.
I mean, we have the Onderon guerrilla force that Saw's a part of. So the resistances.
But we never see any standing armies of non.
No, it's usually just pro Republic resistance groups.
If you know other ones, please send us an email so that we can learn better things and be gooder Star Wars fans.
Real quick on your comment about Palpatine and how putting the Jedi in front of the army was a really good manipulation. It really was, I think, mostly because there wasn't another Force-using faction in the CIS. that was openly fighting the battles. So if we look in like Old Republic era, you've got the Jedi doing the same thing they're doing in the Clone Wars, leading armies and going into campaigns against an enemy, but in a lot of those conflicts, like the Sith were the enemy, and they had Sith fighting alongside their military the same way. So it's real easy to look at that conflict and go, oh, we needed the Jedi to be warriors and part of the army because the enemy was throwing magical wizards at us too. Coming here, there are no magical wizards, aside from like 2 or 3 on the side of the CIS openly being...
Well, it could be said that there weren't any Force-sensitive people that can do what the Jedi do in the galaxy because the Jedi Order is actively going around.
They had a monopoly on...
Yeah. I don't want to say they're taking children, but I mean, that's basically what they're doing under the guise of this is better for them.
And we talked about that in a prior episode too. So.
And they're taking these kids to keep them safe and to help them. It's like the Javier School for Gifted Children.
Yeah, which is also X-Men. What we called it in the last episode.
I cannot pronounce Xavier's name without calling him Javier. So yeah, that school was created to help teach mutant children how to control their powers.
Right.
Also fight secret wars. Hush, hush.
I think we kind of got away from the question a little bit, though. So
yeah.
Let's finish up this part of it. It's like, what would it be like as someone in a society where the enemy is the Jedi? And I just reiterate what I said before. It's probably up to each individual to deal with the history of the Jedi that they know and put that against what they're seeing. And, overwhelmingly, that'll eventually lead to them hating the Jedi, which I don't blame them for.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They're the leaders of the armies coming in and, decimating their planets.
Yeah, you'd be upset too.
Yeah. I think that it kind of wraps up what I have. I have a couple like things to just tack onto there that popped into my brain while I was writing these notes, but there's an anime that I used to watch called Last Exile, and in that world, the world is divided into 2 factions, kind of like the galaxy. But there is a third faction called the Guild, which exists outside of where these factions can reach them. They maintain and enforce the rules of war that exist between these 2 countries. Though, in the series, you do find out that their motive is to keep these guys in endless war so they can keep their place as the mediators. But I just think that's kind of what the Jedi should have been doing, is they should have been existing outside of not a country.
Outside of a faction.
Yeah, exactly. And a third party that could have kind of what they were doing in
they were doing it in
the
Legacy.
Phantom Menace.
Okay, yeah.
Where there was a dispute between the Trade Federation and the Naboo. So they sent the Jedi in to meet a third party that had no stakes in either side to go in and mediate.
True, yeah, because I suppose both of those factions at the time, the Naboo and the Trade Federation, were still under the Republic.
I mean, the Trade Federation never left the Republic.
Yeah, that's such a...
That was just Newt Gunray.
That's such a weird plot point. It's like...
I think
I'm totally not working for the other side, even though I clearly am.
I think they were like 2 seasons into the Clone Wars, and they realized, wait, didn't the movie... Oh, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
To wrap up the whole... how the Jedi were perceived sort of thing, and how earlier I said that it's kind of part of Palpatine's genius long con is that he has created the Jedi to be an enemy for half the galaxy, and then when the Jedi, it's treason. Then the other half of the galaxy now perceives the Jedi as wanting to overthrow the Republic. So now you have one side that hates them because they were actively fighting against them, and then another side that hates them
because they betrayed.
Because they are perceived to have betrayed the Republic.
Right.
All of this being orchestrated by Palpatine. I was like, that's...
Yeah.
And he's a genius.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to look at the political side of Star Wars. I know a lot of people were like, "Oh, this political drama is kind of dumb, and we want more of a Star War." But I mean, that's always been a thing, and to understand the war, like politics is a side of war that we need to like think about and talk about. So, on to the second part of the question.
This is the part that I always forget when I read his question. Sorry, Tim.
Did the CIS also have Force Faith followers within it, and how would a citizen deal with that conundrum? This one is really easy for me to answer, personally. It's a common sort of misconception in Star Wars that the Jedi faith is the only Force faith, or the only popular Force faith that's worth following. Whereas the Jedi are a faith, a faction of the faith. The Force itself is a constant, real, tangible force in the universe. And that's, we see it more when we go into Legends, and then we see it a lot with Luke talking how he does in The Last Jedi about the nature of the Force. The Force is a real, tangible thing that people can see through Force sensitives in the galaxy, and even though the Jedi, as we talked about before, might have the monopoly on it in this particular time period, Force faiths do not necessarily rely on people believing in or agreeing with the Jedi. So it is perfectly conceptualized, it's perfectly acceptable to me to think that, there is a Church of the Force in communities within the CIS that still believe in and worship the Force, or its, various forms and what people call it, and be able to also come to terms with the fact that the Jedi are now an enemy. It's really like that.
There's one faction comes to mind that uses the Force and is also can be militarized. That's the Night Sisters.
Oh, yeah.
Even though they call it the Magics.
I appreciate right now that this is the first time that you have said the thing that I always say about the Night Sisters, which is like, they're using the Force. Because every time I say it, you're just like, no, Ian, it's the Magics.
Yeah, it is. It's the Magics. But,
yeah, but I get what you're saying.
Unless there is magics in the Star Wars universe, and that's Accio Pufferpig. Is that right? I'm not a Potter.
Accio Pufferpig. Amazing.
But yeah, in Rogue One, when they go to Jeddah and they go to the holy city of Jeddah, we see that there are not just the Jedi Order temples there. There's other Force religions there. We see that there are other Force-based religions, and it's the same thing in the real world, where how many different denominations of Christianity are there?
Right.
Which one is the right one? Well, there's one that's more popular than the others, and then there's also the others,
right,
who have the same beliefs, slightly tweaked.
Right.
So yeah, I agree. I'm sure that there was other Force-based religions and belief systems in the CIS that weren't necessarily the Jedi Order. But kind of as I said earlier, were there other militant Force-using factions that were, bigger than Dathomir?
Right.
Probably not.
No.
Because for centuries, the Jedi Order has been sending out Jedi Force feelers to bring these children back to the Order to teach them how to use their powers. So, I mean, you could say that there were ones that didn't make, like Anakin didn't pass. Right. Qui-Gon just said, I'm going to do this.
There are Force sensitives out there that never came in contact. Like,
Maz Kanata can...
Yeah.
She's probably... I'm sure she's Force sensitive.
Yeah, she knows a lot about it. At least she's, like, Force believing.
Yeah.
Chirrut
is Force sensitive.
Chirrut, yeah.
He has to be Force sensitive. Or he's just rad.
Yeah, or he's just awesome.
He's just rad.
Or Porque no las dos.
What about Porkins?
Porkins, no...
Can't hold it.
Can feel when he's crashed. So the last part of this question, which I think is actually,
Wait,
again...
There's a third part? Oh, I'm sorry, Tim.
Yeah. Which is, I feel, is probably also pretty easy to answer. Is we see in A New Hope that some of the Imperials felt that the Jedi religion was old and outdated belief system, but that but was that designed into Imperial doctrine or just a feeling held by its members? And I think this goes back to your comment about the long game that Palpatine was playing and how, he's already kind of orchestrated the hate for the Jedi in the Clone Wars. He so expertly and masterfully manipulated the information about the Jedi during the conflict and immediately after, that it is so much easier to convince a population of something when you are wiping out information and history and painting a negative picture of things. Like, it's and it all comes back to that manipulation of information. It only takes one generation of the previous generation not talking about a thing in order for you to forget the thing. Like, if my parents, if all of our parents' generations just never talked about World War II, we would all not know anything about World War II, right? And they wouldn't talk about it if they had the government breathing down their necks saying, talk about this and spread this information and we'll come after you. Like, so it's really easy to manipulate that that information.
It's really hard to come up with like a real world excuse a real world example solely because the Jedi had been around for thousands of years.
Right.
And I can't think of any of our knowledge that's been around for thousands of years.
Yeah. But in a galaxy of trillions, there's only like thousands of Jedi, and even people like Anakin on Tatooine, he had this wildly different vision of what the Jedi were when he met Qui-Gon than what he actually is, So it goes to show that, like, even if the galaxy might know about the Jedi, each community, depending on how much interaction they've had, what they've heard, like, they're not going to have the same... Their vision of the Jedi is not necessarily going to be rooted in truth. So, because there's so little, like, they can't just, bring up the Wikipedia page of the Jedi and be like, oh, that's what they are. Like, that's not really how communication and stuff works in Star Wars. It's just a really fascinating sort of thing where, we put so much knowledge in, like, well, how could they forget this? So it's like, well, not everybody's going to know about them, like, period. And those who do might have only heard hearsay or legends and, passed down for generations and generations. And when information is that sparse or weird or different, it's way more easy to manipulate.
Yep. I agree.
Yeah. So, I hope that answers your question, Tim.
Not that we know the definitive thing. And again, if you know the answers to any of these questions that have been presented in books or any other media that I've been too lazy to read, please let me know so that I will become less ignorant. Unless it's not an audiobook form, then I'm going to remain ignorant.
I really think that some of this is just evidential based on what we see in Star Wars. So,
and we're doing that thing where we're taking a fictional space fantasy and trying to apply real world politics to something that doesn't always need to have real world, doesn't need to always be grounded in reality.
Right. But I mean, that's just part of being a fan of Star Wars. We nitpick and we analyze and super analyze these things. But I mean, it's not going to change anything really. If you are like Tim and you want to ask us a question that you'd like to hear us talk about on air, feel free to do so. As John said multiple times throughout the episode, just send us an email at Hothpod or tweet at us on the Twitter.
Hothpod.
At Hothpod or... Hothpod at gmail.com.
Thank you.
For the email.
Don't just type Hothpod into your...
I mean, you could, but it's not going to get you far. Or it might. I don't know. I haven't tried it. And then you can always leave us a direct comment at hothtopicspodcast.com. So, yeah. Good talk. Good talk.